Hi, Amy Shaw here. It is March 16th, 2016, and I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about how atheism and religion are actually two sides of the same coin. Um, if I look a little bit tired, rugged today, I had chemotherapy yesterday and I haven't been sleeping good, so hopefully I won't have any episodes of chemo brain where my brain just spaces out. Hopefully I can be succinct and articulate and make my point in as speedy as a fashion as I can. So basically why this conversation is coming up for me is that all my life I've had atheist friends. Some of them are people that have come from religious backgrounds and for whatever reason, they've rejected that religion and gone into atheism, and some of them have just been like radical rationalist atheists from the get-go. Um, yeah, what a challenging group of people to engage with because yeah, they're just definitely challenging. The friends that I have that have come out of religion, I find them a little bit easier to actually engage with conversationally. But recently I have another atheist friend that's come into my life, and just this week we had a pretty lengthy conversation about that because he's constantly trying to sort of expose me to atheism and his way of thinking, as if I am ignorant or not knowledgeable about it, which is kind of interesting. I do have a religious Protestant background. I don't consider myself religious anymore. However, I still am a spiritual person. And so I'm always bringing that sort of part of me into any conversation. So it's interesting as he's, trying to enlighten me about why atheism is the best way to be and way to live. It's brought up a lot of conversation, and really I'm just reiterating some of the things and points that I made to him, but I want to share my viewpoint of why I believe atheism and religion are really just two sides of the same coin. First of all, I want to say the interesting thing is that atheists tend to view science as God in the sense that they're rational, materialistic, nihilistic in their thinking. So they don't really feel a need to identify with a higher purpose, or in that sense, they're very, what do you call that? I had to see the chemo brain. The word's not coming to me. When somebody's very not self-centered, not narcissistic, hedonistic. That's the word I was thinking of. They're sort of hedonistic. They feel like, their purpose of their life is to just live it and enjoy it. And that they're biologically in the whole big scheme of humanity, they are nothing. They count for nothing. Their purpose is nothing. And it's just part of this life cycle. But they're also very materialistic in the sense that, and this is what I mean by materialism, is that they process their entire experience of life and what they hold to be true through a materialist, through the five senses, and what I can see, hear, taste, smell through my five senses. Anything else, any other sort of imaginative thing or spiritual thing, religious thing, anything that can be actually proven by science is considered just myth, and it's patently rejected. So this is really the perspective my friend comes from. So he's always trying to sort of expose me, and he's always talking about science as if I don't know what science is. I have a master's degree. It's in social science, which is sort of like the abused stepchild of the scientific community, right? Social science is like the Cinderella, always trying to measure up and always being mistreated. And because in social science, there's so many more sort of variables and less control. And, experimental design tends to be quasi-experimental design. And so it's a lot easier scientifically to dismiss social science research than hard science, because in hard science you're in a lab, you're controlling everything, observe, affect, and everything's much more defined. But the interesting thing is, as I'm trying to explain to my friend, is that the very foundation of anything is perception and belief. And so A really good example is I remember watching, I believe it was on National Geographic, and they were talking about evolution and of the human species, and they were talking about intelligence. And they said research has proven that basically um, people of the Jewish heritage are the highest, they have, statistically the highest intelligence. And so they went down and sort of ranked intelligence level by race. Well, coming from a social science psychology background, I know that this was a big debate that we discussed in my undergraduate classes, even tests when I took psych tests and measures, and we were talking about IQ testing. And I mean, any PhD psychologist will absolutely confirm this, that first of all, IQ is a theoretical construct. We don't really even know what intelligence is in essence, and how to actually really measure that in essence. So we've just sort of gone down a certain path of, okay, this is intelligence and this is how we measure it. But it's not a done deal. The debate still continues. And the other sort of ugly side of that is that all IQ tests are extremely culturally bound. And so they're already predisposed to people that aren't white not scoring as high on them. The language that's used in them, the sort of constructs that are used in them that we're using to measure intelligence are cultural constructs. So, like I said, it's easy to say, well, that's social science, well, that's just not, but what about this? When I go into the lab and I do this and do this to this thing and this is the effect of it, how can you say that that's not legitimate? Well, because even the scientists, the second they are observing, are bringing to the table the lenses that they wear in processing and making sense of what they're observing. And so that in itself is also cultural and not the truth in a sense. I was telling my friend, it's really interesting because he's so like into science and the scientific method, and like that's the foundation for everything and nothing else exists. That's it. And to me, I see science itself almost annihilating itself, because when we start going off into astrophysics and quantum physics and start expanding our mind into more philosophical areas of questioning, it brings up a whole interesting sort of dynamic, with Einstein, calling the spooky action at a distance, right? This is way back in the 1930s. And the whole quantum physics and what they brought to the table in terms of like particle entanglement and what happens when you observe, like the act of actually observing, changes the outcome from the particle to the wave. So that's really curious because scientifically, it should just always be the same. So how does the fact that a human being is observing the experiment, not even altering it anyway, just observing it, is changing the outcome of it? So these are bringing in questions that we have to really ask. The observer effect, all these things that quantum theory is bringing to the table. And, and that has to do with our sense of reality, like what's real and how we process, and so I was telling this friend too, like science itself is all theory. Like he's just coming at it assuming like, A plus B equals C, and it's always like this, and I'm trying to explain to him, I have a master's degree. I've been indoctrinated to death in the scientific method. I know how to do research. For my thesis, I did an original piece of research, designed the experiment, designed the measurement instrument, did all the data collection, coding, statistical analysis. I know how to do that. Very, very indoctrinated into it. And in a sense, it isn't any different than when I went to church. It's sort of like this brainwashing. And it really starts out when we're in elementary school and we get our first exposure to the scientific method, just the very simple foundation of the scientific method. First you get a thesis, then you go, and so it begins. And it's a slow chinking away at our ability to think for ourselves and to be indoctrinated. And we're indoctrinated to believe like the scientific method is God, that is the supreme way for us to know objectively. But again, the reality of it is, it really isn't any more objective than when you go into church and you're reading the Bible. Just because something's like occurring in your head and not through your five senses as you expect it, does not make it less real. And so, a good example. So a lot of people, atheists, particularly, seem to think like the scientific method is the sort of foundation for how we know objective truth. And they reject anything that's, emotional or spiritual or can't be like proven through the five senses. So to them, like when you go to church and you read the Bible and those are just stories and their beliefs, they believe that's all myth because it can't be proven. That's a whole different debate, actually, whether it can be proven or not. But systemically, they choose to sort of see the world through a certain thing, and everything is boiled down to direct experience and observable effect. And so, like I said to my friend, well, how do you even know that that's real? Well, because I see it. Okay, so like this right here, this dried paintbrush, how lovely of my son to do that. It's got like this metallic purple paint on it. It's a shiny, chromy, black handle paintbrush with a metallic purpley paint on it. I'm sure we could all look at that and agree on that. But how do you know that that's what it is? Because I've told you that that's what it is, and you can see it with your eyes, and you're agreeing with me. This is how we have learned to identify these colors, these shapes, and these things. This is a paintbrush, this is that color. But how do you know that that's really real? How do you know? So we take that for granted that we know that. One of the things that I learned, my husband and I both really like to learn a lot. And there's this video right here, how colors affect you, what science reveals. It was really interesting. I got a lot out of it. But the most profound thing that I really remember, because I watched this several years ago, this is the instructor is Professor William Lidwell from University of Houston, and I got this through the Great Courses. I have a whole DVD cabinet full of these videos from the Great Courses. I love them. Anyways, one of the most profound things that I recall watching this was he was talking about color and how ancient mankind did not have, we only had black and white. It wasn't until many centuries in that we started getting colors like red and blue and green. Here's another example, even just recently. There's an anthropologist by the name of Jules Davidoff who went and studied the African people, nomadic tribal people from Africa, the Himba tribe. This is kind of what they look like. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful people. What a great culture. Well, in their culture, they do not have a word for the color blue. So, in fact, historically, and you can Google this and see what I'm telling you. Historically, the color blue did not actually show up in any sort of like text or acknowledgement until the Egyptian era. So prior to that, any texts that we have that are talking about colors do not mention the color blue. And this many researchers, scientists, agree on this, social scientists, anthropologists, psychologists. So this has been studied extensively. So what Jules Davidoff did is he went down there to study the Himba people, and he showed them this and asked them to identify the square that was a different color than the other squares. And they couldn't do it. To them, they all looked the same. They consistently made errors, and they just could not discern that there was actually a blue square on there. It's so obvious to us, right? Easy to see which one's different color, but to them, they weren't able to do it because the word blue does not exist in their language. And so the conception of it isn't there. Okay, likewise, he showed them. Now, the Himba tribe has actually several words for the color green. whereas we tend to just have one word. I mean, you can open a box of Crayolas and there's like sage green and forest green and hunter green, and we have all these colors thanks to Crayola where we've labeled them. But overall, like in a day-to-day sort of conversation, we don't go, oh yeah, I bought a metallic hunter green car. We say we bought a green car, right? And so pretty much we have a single word for the color green. So he showed them this, all green squares, and asked them to identify which color was different. And all of them unilaterally quickly could identify which color green square was different than the others. Now, when I look at this, I can't see a difference. Can you see a difference? Well, I'll just tell you, this is the one that's different, this one right here. Now, I printed this out on my computer, from the original experiment that he used. Obviously there's going to be distortions in that, just the file and the artifacts that occur in the different file types and how color is actually coded, and then the quality of my printer and all of this, of course, is going to have an effect. So I'm not trying to say like, here, we're doing this experiment, can you, I'm not really even trying to do that. I'm just trying to show you that the coloration variation was so minor that most of us in our culture could not even identify a difference. Yet for the Himba people, it was super easy, and right away they knew which color was different than the other ones. This one right here. So that really makes us sort of think about how reality is created. Language really is, in essence, the foundation of consciousness, because prior to language, we didn't have a way to be conscious. We didn't have a way to process our environment other than a very basic and animalistic, instinctual way. So once we got consciousness and we started developing language, and then all of a sudden, we're having consciousness in our head, thought in our head, and then as we're talking about it, we're able to connect with other people, and this is how reality is created. Oh, I think that's blue. Oh, okay, I think that's blue too. And next thing you know, you have 100,000 people calling that blue. And so that is how reality is created, is everybody is agreeing that this is a paintbrush and that it has a metallic purple paint dried on, and that this, we're agreeing on this because this is centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries of communication and language. But the point of it is language, and it is culturally bound, because you can go to the Himba tribe in Africa and they do not know the color blue. They don't see the color blue. They don't recognize it as distinct from the color green because it's cultural. Now, the scientific mind would tell us, well, gee, it's obvious. This is an observable sort of difference. I mean, this is so obvious. Look at, well, maybe that's not as easy to see on there. Let's do this one. This is an obvious difference, right? So this, when I go and measure this scientifically, in my observation, this color is a lot lighter than this color, but as I'm making this observation and I'm discerning these differences, I'm coming to it with a cultural set of beliefs, ideas, and languages. Now, language is really interesting. Terence McKenna's talked a lot about that because he's done, excuse me, I don't know what's wrong with me today. He's done so much hallucinogens, and he's experienced so much of an altered state that, he would come back from that and say, this is what we're lacking. We're lacking a language to talk about these different states and places that are being visited in these states. And so it makes it really hard to talk about it. So for the person that's coming back out of a hallucinogenic experience, they can't really share it because the language isn't there. So that's really an interesting concept. But and that leads me into the idea of reality and shamanism. Okay, one of the things that shamanism, the core belief of shamanism, is that there is no distinction between a dream state, a waking state, a visual journey, hallucinogen journey, however, it's all the same. And the interesting thing to me about that is that in the last week, I've had come across the Facebook feed over and over and over and over, a recent study that's come out where they took, I think it was a dozen or something like 24, it was a small number of subjects, but they gave them LSD and they put them under the functional MRI machine and they measured the brain activity that was happening. Well, gee, I don't think they really needed to do a research study on that to know that something's amazing's happening in the brain, duh, and that it's probably accessing the visual center of the brain, duh. We already knew this, right? So, but they did this because they wanted to see specifically what was happening and how it was different than, just a normal sort of thinking state that wasn't induced by LSD. So what they found was, there was some difference, but the difference was more in terms of like the amount of area that was being lit up and sort of interacting. So when the subjects were under LSD, the dynamic was much sort of richer and more engaged in the brain than just in a normal waking state. But the point of it is, of what I'm trying to make for this here, is that obviously the primary area of the brain that was lighting up and being super active was the visual cortex. Okay, so if we were to just let somebody live underneath a functional MRI and watched the brain activity happening 24 hours a day for 7 days a week, and to see, what would we see? We would see the second they wake up in the morning and open their eyes, boom, on goes the visual cortex, right? The second they fall asleep and then enter into REM, the dream state, boom, there goes the visual cortex, right? The second they ingest a hallucinogenic drug and it's metabolized in their system, boom, there goes the visual cortex. So scientifically, if what's happening in the brain, regardless of all the other sort of interactions and things that are happening, just taking that aspect alone, the visual cortex, how can we discern then between a dream state, a hallucinogenic vision, a hypnagogic or hypnotic visioning versus waking? I mean, what is really the distinction? What makes one more real than the other when we're experiencing them all in our brain? See, how we're defining reality is culturally. It's what we bring to it. And we're saying, this is real, this isn't. This is real, that's imagination. I'm not going to believe in imagination because that's not real. It's not really occurring. But this, what I'm seeing right here, this is real. This right here is real. But if I imagine this, I'm imagining it, that's not real. So the atheist is saying, I believe in this is supreme, this is my God because I see it and I know it and I can prove it exists. But these people over here that are doing this shit, that's not real. Come on, people. How do you know? How do you know? See, so I was trying to explain to my friend, like, this believing in the science, believing that this is real, defining this is just as much an indoctrination as you're going to get if you go into a religious system and you're over and over and over and over being told, this is what it means, this is what it means, this is what it means, this is what it means. In essence, none of those are truly experientially based, because truly experiential has to do with consciousness. And so the atheist is putting themselves in like this box of very defined system of, this is what I believe and why I believe, and I don't ever get outside of this, because the second I get outside of this structure that I've created and hold superior to everything else, then I'm entering into the land of faith and magic and myth, and I can't do that, so I'm going to stay right here in this box. This is how I stay grounded. Well, the same thing. That's the same thing that the Christian is doing. I'm in this box. Here's the structure of it. This is my belief system. And the second I go out of that, oh my God, I'm afraid I might lose my faith or might start believing something that's not true. And so they stay within these rigid things. Same thing. It's the same thing. Two sides of the same exact coin. You following me here? So, I'm trying to, like, as my friend thinks he's indoctrinating me or trying to get me to understand how science is superior and how life is basically meaningless. It's the same thing. He's a dad. So I had to tell him, look, okay, that moment that your children were born, did you feel something emotionally? Well, of course I did. I'm a human being. Just because I'm an atheist doesn't mean I'm not human. Okay. Well, I can take that emotion that you felt in that moment and reduce it down to a neurochemical. I can reduce that down into hormones interacting with neurotransmitters in your brain to create a certain sensation in your body that you are then culturally interpreting as this emotion. Love feels like this, pain feels like this, joy feels like this, sadness feels like this. He says, yeah, you're right. I agree with you. You can reduce it down to the biology, and I believe that. I agree with you. Okay, well, what makes religious experience any different? I mean, we know that certain things like DMT occur naturally. They're organic to our body. This is what creates near-death experience, right? This is what creates hallucinogenic sort of visions when you partake of ayahuasca or DMT or other psychoactive substances that also sort of the very fact that we have cells that have THC receptors on them is pretty interesting to me because not all species have those. So, in other words, certain species can ingest cannabis and not have any effect whatsoever. Their body just metabolizes it out. But we actually have receptors in our body so that THC goes into that receptor and creates the sort of high that we experience when we partake of cannabis. So that's interesting. And how can we say that experience that we have is less valid or less legitimate just because we have reduced it down to a cellular or molecular level? Oh, my stomach today. So I feel, in that aspect that atheism is really lacking. It's very materialistic. It's very nihilistic, and it's just truly lacking in substance. It comes from a place of sort of cultural bias in that it can't even recognize that its own system is as equally culturally and experientially biased as a religious system. Truly, and this is why I feel I'm more of a spiritual person, because I'm trying to completely even let go of my ego sense of knowing truth by just letting go and realizing that the thoughts and the beliefs and everything that I've been indoctrinated into is not, and none of that is true. None of this is reality. We've all just been taught and indoctrinated to call this, and we've all agreed upon it. But as we shift, it's time to sort of try to expand our consciousness out of these boxes and realize that we are more and there is more, and that the reality as we see it, the material reality and science, how we've like created that to sort of measure and objectify everything is a farce. It's not true. None of that's true. It's not true. I don't care. My friend says to me, well, what about gravity? Are you trying to say gravity is not true? Well, there are astrophysicists, have pretty much told us there are places in the multiverse, in the universe, where there is anti-gravity, where gravity does not exist. So the fact that it does exist here on our planet and we experience it doesn't really make it true, and it doesn't really make it not true. It just means that it's an aspect of reality that we've created to be able to be here on this planet and to live here in these bodies as human beings. But it requires a certain amount of faith even to believe that, and that's the point that I'm getting at, is that we take this for granted, that this is a color, bluish purple color. We take this for granted, and we believe this is hard fact. In reality, we've been taught this, and we're so indoctrinated that we don't even question it. We don't even know to question it, right? But in reality, if you step back out and really truly look objectively, it takes as much faith to believe that this is a purple blue metallic paint as it does to believe, say, that Jesus was the Son of God and came to enlighten us, to save us from ourselves. Just because I can see one visually with my eye and I can see one with my mental eye in my head does not make one any more real than the other one. So I hope that was clear, and I know I sort of talked a lot around the same sort of thing, but I really wanted to drive the point home of how atheism is just the same on the same coin as religion. So I love talking about this stuff: philosophy, science, art, religion, faith, spirituality, consciousness, especially. I love talking about this stuff. So if you have comments or you want to engage, please leave me comments, leave me videos, whatever. Let's do it. Let's get this conversation started. All right. Have a great day, and I will see you guys around. Bye.